So it's Tuesday the 6th of September, the release day for Stephen King's new book, Fairy Tale. So I'm very excited that obviously I am at work, obviously. Anyway, here's my experience with Fairy Tale. Mid-morning. Nothing yet. Not nervous. Not entirely happy either. Hopefully my bookshop will get in touch soon. So lunchtime's been and gone, still nothing yet. Again, not nervous, but, well, maybe a little bit. I have faith that Kenilworth Books will pull through, and that by the time I'm able to leave work, I will be going to the bookshop and not just home. Mixed news. Good news, it's in. Bad news, I've got a meeting. Well, wonders never cease. The team meeting actually finished on time, which means I'm going to go home and work from home for the rest of the afternoon. And you know what's on the way home? Kenilworth Bookshop. And I got my text. So I'm a bike ride away from getting Fairy Tale, which I then won't be able to read until tonight. But hey, it's a step closer. It's time. Finally made it here. I'm not going to film inside because I am way too self-conscious to ask them if I can. Me too. Okay, I'm home. Let's take a look at this thing. Here we go. Fairy Tale, Stephen King's new one. That's the back, and let's take a quick look. Whoa. Cool. Here we go. When he spoke, it was again hard to believe that I hadn't stepped into a storybook and become one of the characters. Hello, young prince. I've been expecting you. And there we go. Now I just need the rest of the working day to be done so I can get on with reading it. Legendary storyteller Stephen King goes into the deepest well of his imagination in this spellbinding novel about a 17-year-old boy who inherits the keys to a parallel world where good and evil are at war and the stakes could not be higher for their world or ours. So, work is done, kids are in bed, it's finally time to sit down and start reading Fairy Tale. But before I do, just thought I'd have a quick little glance at what the synopsis is and see if there's anything interesting to pick out just from the cover before I actually get stuck into reading it. So I'll read you the synopsis from inside the cover, see what you make of it. So we've got Charlie Reed looks like a regular high school kid, great at baseball and football, a decent student, but he carries a heavy load. His mum was killed in a hit-and-run accident when he was 10, and grief drove his dad to drink. Charlie learned how to take care of himself and his dad. Then, when Charlie is 17, he meets a dog named Radar and her aging master, Howard Bowditch, a recluse in a big house at the top of a big hill with a locked shed in the backyard. Sometimes strange sounds emerge from it. Charlie starts doing jobs for Mr. Bowditch and loses his heart to Radar. Then, when Bowditch dies, he leaves Charlie a cassette tape telling a story no one would believe. What Bowditch knows and has kept secret all his long life is that inside the shed is a portal to another world. King's storytelling in Fairy Tale soars. This is a magnificent and terrifying tale about another world than ours, in which good is pitted against overwhelming evil and a heroic boy and his dog must lead the battle. And on the back cover, we get a little bit of insight from King himself. So the inspiration for Fairy Tale came from a question King asked himself at the beginning of the pandemic. What could he write that would make him happy? As if my imagination had been waiting for the question to be asked, he says, I saw a vast, deserted city, deserted but alive. I saw the empty streets, the haunted buildings, a gargoyle head laying overturned in the street. I saw smashed statues of what I didn't know, but I eventually found out. I saw a huge sprawling palace with glass towers so high their tips pierced the clouds. Those images released the story I wanted to tell. So yeah, he wanted to write something that would make him happy, so had a kid whose mum's dead and his dad's an alcoholic. It's Stephen King, I guess. Just another look at the cover for you. It's very nice. And just a quick glance inside. So the dedication page, got thinking of REH, ERB, and of course HPL, which I'm assuming is Robert E. Howard, who wrote Conan the Barbarian and loads of other Pulp Fiction stuff. Edgar Rice Burroughs, who I think wrote King Kong and some other stuff. No, not King Kong, Tarzan. And of course, H.P. Lovecraft, who created loads of weird things. So right before I've even gone into the book, there's lots of classic fantasy characters there. Definite weird twist. Definite fairy tale. Seems to fit. So some interesting authors to pick out at the start. And also worth noting, on the credits page, it mentions illustrations. So there's 2 artists doing illustration to this. Gabriel Rodriguez in the odd-numbered chapters in the epilogue, and Nicola Delort in the even-numbered chapters. So there we go, chapter 1. There is one of the first illustrations. So we've got illustrations, we've got fantasy stuff, we've got a dog who knows, might not even die. And we've got a kid who's a bit messed up, but also pretty solid too. Sounds like we're in for an adventure. So I think it's time to stop waffling and start reading fairy tale. So I'm 1 chapter in. I've acquired a baby and I'm enjoying it a lot so far. I had a reference to Cujo already and some great storytelling, as you would expect. I'm hooked. Now I'm gonna have to stop talking because the baby's waking up. I'm gonna go for a walk to the kitchen and get a beer and carry on reading. And I probably won't do any more updates while I've still got the baby on. Because if he wakes up, then I'm fucked. So, I know I said I wasn't going to do updates because I've got the baby. But I'm going to try. So, just read chapter 2, which is mainly the introduction to Radar the dog. And she's a really, really good dog. An old dog. She reminds me a lot of my parents' dog. And I have both good and bad feelings about how things are going to go for Radar. I think we're going to see a lot of her. But she's also an old dog. And she's a dog in a Stephen King book. So she's probably going to fucking die. But hey, here we go. Yeah. And blue chambray shirt. Gotta have one in there somewhere. So, on with the fairy tale. So, I'm going to keep this fairly quiet because it's late and the rest of the house is asleep. But I'm 134 pages into fairy tale, 8 chapters down. Really enjoying it so far. The story's got me hooked. There's no real fantasy elements just yet, but still got a long way to go, and you know, I think they're only going to be coming around the corner very soon. But yeah, I'm really enjoying the build of the relationship between Charlie and Howard and Radar the dog, obviously. And there's lots of seeds being sown that I'm fascinated to see how they pan out. And I'm really keen to see how the fantasy stuff ends up coming into play as well. All the talk in the build-up to this has been around the fantasy. People even sort of referencing the talisman quite a lot, which ironically and sadly has actually come to pan out in terms of the fact that on the day that this book released, we've learned that Peter Straub has sadly passed away. You know, there was a lot of talk about this potentially being a substitute for a third talisman book, because I know that was something that King and Straub had hoped to do, but sadly he passed away, so that's not going to happen. So yeah, very interested to see how the fantasy stuff pans out, but really enjoying it so far, about a quarter of the way through. But that is day 1 of Fairy Tale. I need to go to bed now though, because I'm very tired, but we'll see how we get on tomorrow. So day 2 of Fairy Tale. I've been up since 6:30 in the morning, but as you can probably hear, that's because I've got small children. Not done any reading yet, and probably won't do any reading until they're in bed tonight. So yeah, I've got all day to ponder what I read last night, which, as I said, really enjoyed. Potentially could be seen as a bit of table setting, but you know, in the hands of Stephen King, even table setting is really, really good. And I do think it was more than table setting. It's really given us a lot of good background to the key characters, and really establishing relationships and building those worlds in actually quite a tight way. Even though it was 130 pages, it was all worth it, it was all necessary, and I feel really well grounded in the main characters now, and I'm just desperate to see what happens next. So at some point today I'll get back to reading. So it's the evening of day 2 with Fairy Tale, and I'm about to start my next big reading block. I did actually get a couple of chapters in earlier today. There was a nice lull in the day where this child was asleep here and my elder one was watching videos, so I got a couple of chapters in, including the death of Howard, which is not a spoiler to say because it's in the synopsis on the inside flap of the book. And that was kind of sad, but also kind of good, because you know that death is key to the plot moving on and the fantasy elements starting to come into play. So weird as it is to say, I was kind of quite pleased to see the old guy snuff it. And now, it's like 9:15 at night. This one's asleep. I've got a beer. Time to crack on with Fairy Tale. So you remember that one of the key characters in Fairy Tale is Radar the dog. Here she is. She is a very good dog. I'm really enjoying reading about her. And it makes me think, oh, I wish I had a dog. And then I remember, I do have a dog. Is that twat over there? So, I am halfway through chapter 15. But I'm going to go to bed soon because I'm quite literally falling asleep. Not because the story is putting me to sleep, just because I've been awake for a long time today. Since my last little mention, the fantasy stuff has really kicked in. Literally gone to another world over the last couple of hours of reading. And in King's hands, obviously, it's great and very compelling. Also been dipping into some interesting theories that have been spouted on the Losers Club Discord. The Losers Club Patreon Discord, I should add. Too tired to go into those now, but maybe I'll mention them tomorrow and offer some thoughts on them. But yeah, some interesting theories from a couple of people on there. But I'm going to wrap up my reading for tonight. That's 2 days of Fairy Tale done, just shy of halfway through the book. So we'll carry on and see how things pan out. So just while I make a cup of tea to break up my working day here on day 3 of Fairy Tale, I thought I'd take this opportunity to just have a quick look again at the beautiful cover of this UK edition, because I didn't really spend much time with it the other day. Talking of beautiful things, here's the opposite of that. Hello, Floyd. Are you a twat today? Yes, I am. Anyway, that's a pig. Fairy Tale. Now, the cover really, really is nice. The more I've been looking at it this week, the more little things I've noticed. So, like, this bit here where we've just got this sort of stream of pinky rose light coming in from the side. Really like that. And the colours, I thought they were quite cold at first when I saw it online and when I first picked up my copy. But the more I live with it, it's actually really rich. And this gold lettering for King's name and the gold colours in the sunset with Charlie and Radar there, and that little bit of pink and purple on the side really does set it off. And I love that there's sort of warmth over there, but cooler colours here. The font is very cool as well. I think this is really good for a story called Fairy Tale. I think it really, really does work. So yeah, I'm a big fan of the front cover. Back cover's fine, pretty dull. And then obviously these end pages are also really trippy and cool. But yeah, I just wanted to put that in there here on day 3. Not done any reading yet, obviously, because I've been at work and about to go back to work once my tea is made. But there we go. What a beautiful cover. And there are Charlie and Radar. And look, here's our own version of Charlie and Radar. It's me and Floyd. Floyd, just so you know, if I discover a portal to another world, I'm not taking you. So, I'm on another tea break from work, but I realised, I think in my ramblings from last night, I mentioned about some of the crazy theories and conversations that were going on the Losers Club Discord. So Losers Club is obviously the best Stephen King podcast out there. You can go and check that out. And I'm one of the Patreon members, so I get access to the Discord, and there's loads of other constant readers out there. And obviously we're all reading fairy tale and discussing it as we go along. And yesterday, a few hot takes were flowing around, which I thought were interesting to throw into the mix here in this sort of review, live vlogging type experience of fairy tale. Could be interesting to hear what you thought. So it all started when my friend and one of the hosts of the excellent Psychotronica podcast, which you should check out, Emily, when she threw out there, she read the book in like a day, and she threw out that she was getting vibes, she was getting spidey senses tingling, that King did not write this one alone. Now admittedly, I did not help matters by saying to Emily that, yeah, who knows, maybe he and Straub wrote it together and it was the fabled third collaboration, but they kept it a secret. They were going to announce it on release day, but then of course the actual Straub news that gets announced on release day is that Straub has died, so they have to keep it quiet. Emily then sort of put that out there in the message boards, and that didn't help. But turns out other people were thinking the same, partly because this story is set in Illinois as well, so Midwest, it's got that feel to it. And I guess partly because it's fantasy, and it does feel different from what King's put out recently. And I think here's an interesting theory, and it's kind of one of those fun ones to throw around, but you know, when you look back at the collaborations King has done, he's been very open at putting them out there. And I think he is the kind of writer who is very conscious of his position as the biggest author in the world, that actually he's very keen for other people to get credit. So I think if it were a collab, we would know about it. I think actually for me, and this was something I was chatting to Emily about as well, and maybe I'd be keen to hear your thoughts once you've read the book, is that it actually just feels like a slightly different pace to what he's been putting out recently. And if you look at the back of Fairy Tale, you can see he worked on this one for over a year. And certainly I get the real sense that you can tell he was enjoying writing it, and there was no rush to plough through. Like, he started this while we were still in a pandemic. He probably didn't know how long that was going to go on for. But you do get a real sense that once he got into this world that we go into in Fairy Tale, and even the world building beforehand and all the place setting, he's just having fun with it. And as a result, the pace of the story is slower than some of his recent ones. Not in a bad way at all, just different. But I've also found that it's affected the pace of my reading, because I'm just enjoying savouring this, and I'm enjoying the words he's using and the worlds he's creating. So at this point in my Fairy Tale journey, I've probably spent about 6 or 7 hours reading, and normally with that amount of reading time, I probably read about 60 pages a minute. Normally now I am stopping to make notes for this review and to do these little videos and stuff, but even so, 7 hours worth of reading in a 577 page story, I would have expected to be well past halfway by now. And I'm not. I'm about 40 odd % through, according to my Goodreads. And it's because I'm just taking the time to just enjoy it and savor it. And it's not a conscious decision on my part. I just feel like the way the story is written, and the pacing that it has, and the kind of the confidence and the reassuring way in which it's like, okay, there's a lot to get through here, but it's all worth it, and just go with it. That has kind of slowed down my reading of it. So what that all comes back to, and these wild theories that it's co-authored, I think it does have a different feel to the last few King books out there. That doesn't make me immediately jump to conclusions of other people being involved. There's every chance that maybe Peter Straub read an early version, and I would imagine Joe Hill has seen this in various stages of undress. But it does still feel like King to me. It's got that sort of later vibe in terms of the first person narrative. But it doesn't feel like he's rushing in any way. It doesn't feel like he was on deadline here. It felt like this one, and I guess he said it in the back cover where he was writing a story that would make him happy. It felt like there wasn't, what am I trying to say? You get a sense from the writing that there was no pressure on him here. That, like I said, there was no deadline, no timeline to stick to. and he was just having fun with it, and that comes across in the writing, I think. So I think that's why it feels a bit different, obviously coupled with it not being in Maine and much more fantasy orientated than we've seen in recent King books. But yeah, I don't think he co-authored it. Be interested to hear what you guys thought. I just think he was enjoying himself, and he was enjoying exploring, not being literary, because it's not all full of wanky, waffly nonsense, but just flexing his writing muscles, and just telling a good story. He's telling us a fairy tale after all, and the world building, the place setting, and the atmosphere is a crucial part of any fairy tale. You need to be hooked in, and this one has definitely pulled me down the rabbit hole, or down the spiral staircase in this case. And yeah, much as I'm keen to finish, to get this video done and get it out there and try and capture the buzz and cynically get some more views and some hits, I'm really enjoying the fact that it's taking me longer to read, and I'm just savouring it and going through it. So yeah, there we go. I will pick it up this evening when I finally get to sit down and read. But right now I've got to get on the phone to the complaints team of Virgin Media, because frankly, friends, they are wankers. So I'll catch you this evening when the kids are in bed. Hopefully Virgin has all been sorted, and I can sit down and spend another few hours deep in the world of fairy tale. So it's evening time, the kids are in bed, time to crack on with some more reading of fairy tale. But weirdly, the Queen has died. Wasn't expecting that, particularly, during the course of me reading this book, we've had Peter Straub die on release day, and now the Queen died on day 3. Kind of fearful for who else is going to die the longer I keep reading this, so I'm going to crack on with fairy tale. I'm not going to go into Easter eggs too much, but Charlie's middle name is McGee? I see what you did there, King. So I'm done reading for the night. It's kind of lost me a bit tonight. Reading was faster, because I think there was a bit more going on, but I don't know, just at a point in the story where I'm just like, meh, this is fine, but I'm not as hooked as I was in the first quarter, for example. But I'm not a fantasy guy, so might just be that. Anyway, we'll see what tomorrow brings with more of fairy tale. So day 4 of fairy tale. I've not read anything yet today because it's another work day, but I'm like 2/3 of the way through. Thought it'd be worth to do a quick check-in on how I'm finding it so far. So things I like. Really liked the relationship between Charlie and Howard. It had a very much a sort of Mr. Harrigan's Phone vibe, but with a bit more time and room to breathe, and much more fleshed out and developed, and a bit more of a meaningful relationship as well. Love Radar, obviously, and the relationship between Charlie and Radar. I think the relationship between Charlie and his dad is really strong as well. It feels very real, that kind of the son helping the dad through a difficult time and getting through the other side. And the start of the fantasy stuff was okay. The last few chapters I read last night lost me a little bit, but I'm still in. I know I'm not a big fantasy guy, and I'm still in. I'm still convinced that King will take me through on a good story and give me something satisfying at the end. But the last couple of hours of reading last night sort of have dropped this from being sort of right up here to sort of a bit further down here. So I'm keen to see where the rest of the story goes. And I'm being surprised at how few Easter eggs there've been. Little ones like Charlie's middle name being McGee and a reference to Cujo. And there was also a reference to a very well-loved phrase in the world of the Dark Tower, long days and pleasant nights, but not in the context you might expect, which did catch me by surprise. And I think I've only spotted 119 so far, which is flabbergasting, to be honest. But anyway, I reckon I'm coming in at about a 3 out of 5, 6.5 out of 10 so far, but there's still a third of the book to go. And I'm really fascinated to see if this continues down the sort of Eyes of a Dragon route that the last few chapters seem to have shifted towards, or whether King's able to sort of tap into some of that stuff he was doing earlier on in the book that was a bit more my style, while still keeping the fantasy elements. I think that would be really, really interesting. And a bit more horror wouldn't go amiss. Not going to lie there. But hey, let's see how the rest of it goes when I eventually get around to reading it again. Once again, I have baby on my chest. Everyone else is in bed. It's time for more fairy tale. So, who exactly is going to tell Stephen King that 17-year-olds would not use the phrase awesome sauce? I just found a 19. A 19. It definitely is Stephen King. Just found a line that I enjoyed very much, so I'm going to read it here. There's a dark well in everyone, I think, and it never goes dry. That's good. He's good, isn't he? This Stephen King guy. He's good. Just had some pissing action, as in one character pissing on the dead body of another. Bit weird. So it's nearly midnight. I am done reading for tonight. What do I make of tonight's reading? I'm still kind of not got back into it. The fantasy side is just still not doing much for me. I think what I've realised part of the problem is that because it's a fantasy novel, all of the character names are just a bit weird. All of the place names are weird. And I'm just getting lost in all of the names. And it's strange to say, but it feels like King is stretching a bit with some of the descriptions, and at least for me, they're not quite landing. You can tell fantasy is not his regular genre, and while he's still got the ability to throw in lines that I absolutely love, there's large parts of this that are just like, it just isn't quite clicking. And there's some little throwaway lines he keeps using as well. And there's points in this where it's just like, I'd love to see this shit sort of run through an editor. Because I assume he doesn't really have a particularly strict editor. I'd like to see that, definitely. So, yeah, I think the enthusiasm I had for this in the first quarter of the book has definitely waned a lot. And yeah, I'm just lost in all of these weird character names that I can't really picture, and places I'm struggling to picture as well, which is a shame because I was enjoying the first quarter a lot. But it's definitely kind of, as the more I go through the book, the more I'm just kind of blanking out in some points. I keep having to reread bits because I'll get to a line where I've missed something. And I'm very aware that I'm not a big fantasy fan, and a lot of that is just my brain going, nah, I don't like this. But anyway, still got one more session of reading left, I reckon, to finish this. Got about 70 pages left. So that does leave me with a dilemma, because I could finish that in one more go. So naturally that would be tomorrow night, Saturday night. But I had planned to take myself to the cinema to see Crimes of the Future, which is finally out here in the UK. So, I'll just see what happens tomorrow. Will I finish Fairy Tale? Or will I go and watch some body horror on the big screen? I came to the cinema, but I've not come to see Crimes of the Future because after a full-on day of parenting, I'm not in the headspace for that. So I'm going to go and see Bodies, Bodies, Bodies. And as it happens, I'm here a bit early. So going to read a bit more and see where we get to before I go in for my film. And yes, I'm sat in the car reading a book, but frankly, I'm quite looking forward to it. So I'll see you in a bit. I've got about 30 pages left, but it is time for me to go into the cinema and check out Bodies, Bodies, Bodies. So I will finish Fairy Tale when I get home. And and then I'll give you an update as to where I'm at. I might give you my closing thoughts, I might sleep on it and sum it all up tomorrow, but almost there, almost there. So Bodies was very silly. I'm going to go home now and finish Fairy Tale. Right, let's finish this. Finished. Underwhelmed. I need to sleep on this before I give you my final thoughts. And it'd be easier to do without a baby on me as well. So, yeah, I'm going to go to bed and try and come up with how I'm going to articulate my disappointment at this. I'll be back. It's even straight. That's better. Okay, so I gave it... What do you want? This idiot wants to be involved. Just go to bed. Let's try again. Go to bed. So I gave it 2 nights sleep in the end before coming up with my final thoughts on Fairy Tale. I think the overwhelming feeling is just of being underwhelmed, which is quite a nice little loop, isn't it? I'm overwhelmed by feeling underwhelmed. The first quarter of this book I was really in. I was really sold. I loved the relationship between Charlie and Howard and Radar, of course. But then I guess it's no surprise that me, as a non-fantasy fan, kind of started to fall out of love with this when we got to the real fantasy elements, when Charlie went down those stairs and into Empis. Now, some of my criticisms of the fantasy side have to be taken with a pinch of salt because I have that natural bias against fantasy. I'm not a fan. So fantasy has to be really quite special to really click with me. I think what I found most disappointing about Fairy Tale was that it didn't feel like it was good fantasy. It felt like King was stretching for quite a lot of things, and that it was quite boring fantasy. I didn't really feel like there was much of a backstory to what we got here, and there wasn't much history and there wasn't much to pull from when we first get into the world. There's a couple of paragraphs towards the end of the book where we get some of that backstory about the world and about the characters, and I got more from those 3 paragraphs than I did in like the 300 pages before it. And I don't know, I struggled to picture anything, I struggled to connect with anything in that world, and Radar was out of the picture for far too long, which frankly, not happy with. I think also this book could have done with a really, really, really strict editor. There were parts that were quite repetitive. There were parts where it just needed tightening up, and there were parts that just didn't really need to be in there either. But I guess Stephen King is at that point where he doesn't really have much of an editor, particularly not a really strict one who will push back and say, don't include that. But on the flip side of all this, I think it's incredible that someone like Stephen King, who doesn't need to prove anything to anyone and doesn't need to do anything different, is still willing to put himself out of his comfort zone and try different things. And I have to applaud him for that. And I know that this book will really resonate with a lot of constant readers. So I'm probably going to be a bit of an outlier here in terms of not enjoying this one. But you know, I didn't like The Talisman, didn't like Black House, didn't really like Eyes of a Dragon. So I probably was never going to like this one really. First quarter aside, that was before it gets all fantasy-like. But I think it's really a credit to Stephen King that he is still trying new things and he's still pushing himself. Would I want another one of these books? No, not really, but I don't think we'll get another one. You know, his next book's going to be Holly, he's moving on to something different. I think with this one, I was perhaps expecting it to be more of a direct link to the Tower. And I think if we'd have got the fantasy story we've got here, but properly in Midworld and connected to that Tower stuff, that might have hooked me in more. That probably would have been enough to hook me in. But this is a standalone piece of fantasy. I just struggled with it. I didn't find it very entertaining. And like I said, I don't feel like it's an example of good fantasy writing either, which is a shame. But it does show that Stephen King's human. It does show he's not the master and magician at absolutely everything. And like I said earlier, credit to him for trying. I think there are plenty of you watching this and plenty of you out there who will probably enjoy this book, and you will feel completely different to me on this. But, you know, I'm not going to lie in my review. I'm not going to, and I don't think if you've watched up to this point, you'll realise that I was kind of falling out of love with this book the further it went on. I think also calling it fairy tale sort of sets quite high expectations. It didn't have that feel of the fairy tale. One of my friends from the Losers Club forum actually posted last night that they thought Eyes of a Dragon was more of a fairy tale. It had more of a, this story has been passed down from time, you know, this story's been passed down time and time from person to person. And I think he's absolutely right. Eyes of a Dragon definitely does feel like that, and fairy tale doesn't. It doesn't have that well worn in, well lived feel that a fairy tale needs to. So I don't think the title helped. I can see where it was coming from, but I think if you're going to call your book fairy tale, it needs to feel like a fairy tale rather than just simply exploring, not even exploring, touching on little bits of other fairy tales. This one didn't have the feel of the fairy tale. Like, as cheesy as it would have been, this should have started Once Upon a Time, right? And it didn't start Once Upon a Time. So, yeah, it just, I don't know, probably a 2 out of 5 for me. And that's almost entirely taken from the opening section of the book. Yeah, I was really into it until Empis happened. And then I quickly got out of it. And by the end, I was actually quite glad to finish because I was sort of struggling. It was a slow read for me. And I know I said earlier in the video that it felt like it was a slower read because King was taking his time and enjoying it. And I still stand by that in the first part of the book. But when we get to the fantasy elements, it just became a bit of a slog because I think there was too much stretching, too much reaching, too much repeating certain things. And just, I don't know, not enough focus. It wasn't quite sharp enough. And it didn't quite have that zip that some of his recent books have had, which is probably why it was a bit of a slog to get through. But yeah, put it in context, right? It's his, 74th book, and, you know, the vast majority of them have still been absolute bangers. And I've been reading King since 2010, so that's 12 years now. And when I think about the books that have come out as new books in the time that I've been reading King, so in that 12 years, there's only a couple of times I've been disappointed. Fairy Tale, Sleeping Beauties, Wind Through the Keyhole, and that's it. And, you know, if that works out, one disappointment every 4 years, I'll take that. I'll happily take that, because the bits in between are also good. And that's the frustrating thing with Fairy Tale. There are still some really good bits and some really nice lines. Like I said, the first quarter I was totally in. But I'm not a fantasy guy. So I probably went in with the wrong expectations. I think I was just riding that new King wave, that new King buzz so much. Which is natural, right? He's my favourite author. And every new book from him at this stage of his career feels like an absolute gift. And I'm always going to read it. I'm always going to try and find the best in it. And I'm always going to want to finish it. I'm never going to DNF a King book. I just have to accept that sometimes they're not for me. I keep saying in these videos that it's great that we all have different favourites and different least favourites, and there is something for everyone in King's bibliography. Fairy Tale, it's not for me, but I've got 4 bookshelves over there full of books that are for me by this guy. So I'm not too worried. But that's probably it for my summary of Fairy Tale. Do let me know what you think of Fairy Tale when you finished it in the comments. I'm conscious many of you will like it a lot more than me, and that's great. I'd love to hear what you particularly liked about it. And if there's bigger fantasy readers out there who think I'm, you know, who've got a different take on how King handles fantasy, please share that with me as well. Because like I say, for me it was a bit dull and didn't quite feel like particularly good fantasy writing, but that could just be my prejudice against fantasy. But anyway, that's Fairy Tale done. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this slightly different approach to the review, a bit more of a reading vlog style. It was certainly fun to put together. And yeah, I guess I'll be back for the next one. Do stop by to my Instagram at Musson. Send me a message in there if you want to chat more Fairy Tale. Don't forget to hit subscribe to the channel. And I guess next time you see me, we'll be back on another 19 Reasons to Read. So from me, from my pathetic excuse for a dog, and from Stephen King's latest one, thanks for watching. I'll see you soon.